Fight!
So a lot of people might say, why are you making a video of something somebody's already made a video of? What's the value add? Well, I think inherently there is a value add in repeating videos because each person does things a little bit differently. Each person shows some things that other people don't. And what I'm going to discuss right now is exactly one of those things. I believe this is the area where a power steering pump would go on maybe a front wheel drive car or something, but the Spyder doesn't have that. So they've added this little idler pulley in here to give the belt some place to wrap. When they did it, how they did it was they put the pulley on here and drove a bolt through with a nut on the end to hold it in place. But by tightening that bolt, you bring these two supports together and you can actually break them. I mean, they may look sturdy, but in fact, they are fragile. The guy on Stark Reality YouTube channel that I've been mentioning a lot, he actually had one break. He didn't go into a lot of detail about how that happened, and he kind of blamed himself, but I think maybe he just didn't measure ahead of time or something. I'm not sure, but when I move this pulley, so that means that this support is in there to keep that from happening. So this pressed in piece, and so you can see the support tube ends here, and this piece is pressed through this flange basically until it meets, so that there's no stress put on these two supports. It's just the tube and the little ferrule and then the pulley. So when I moved my idler pulley over from the old engine to the new engine, I could see easily that this did not align with that. And so my belt was going to be crooked and it was going to shred. And so at first I thought, well, I gotta adjust this somehow. First I need to find the position, then I gotta figure out how to get to that position, right? And what I thought I might do is just measure how much stuck out right here on one engine and then make it the same on this engine, and boom, I'm good to go, right? But when I started measuring things in here, I noticed that the distance from here to here and the length of this little ferrule that's pressed through there, and even the thickness of this part, they're all different. And even the front cover was different. So I couldn't measure off of the front cover and make it the same old engine to new engine. So it just wasn't, there just wasn't any commonality. It's similar, but not the same enough to base anything on. What I needed to do, and the best way to do it really, was to get a reference point in space, measure the belt relative to that reference point on somewhere else, the crankshaft pulley in this case, and then make it the same on the idler pulley. And how I did that was I put this straight edge across here, just like I've done now, across the face of the pulley, and the bolt sticks out a little bit, so you can't go right through the center, you just have to go near it. But I pushed it up against, and then I measured from the edge of that straight edge to the other side of the belt. Now you could just measure at any point, you could measure the middle of the belt, but again, how are you going to find the middle of the belt, right? It's easier to find the end. And if I measured from here to the start of the belt, then it was a teeny tiny distance. So it was easier to measure the opposite side of the belt, and that's what I did. And I did that, like putting it that way and making sure it was flat across there, and then measuring across down on the crankshaft. And then I moved that up where I had a second ago. It's falling off on me. And I did the same on the idler pulley. And I took the difference and I got the amount that I needed to move in, which turned out to be 3.68 millimeters. Which was good because my gap was like 4.07 millimeters. That meant I could move as far as I needed to go and successfully do this. If it had been less, then I would have had to sort of shave down this piece, this pressed in piece there to get there. But I needed the two to come together, because if I didn't and there was a little gap and I kept tightening the nut through on the bolt, then I would have started putting pressure on the ears and I could break them again. So it turns out that my gap was only 14 thousandths of an inch. It's like 4 sheets of paper thick, I think. So it's not very much. And I probably could have just gone there and there would have been a 14 thousandths misalignment between the belt up here and the belt down there, or the rest of the system. But I decided to go ahead and do it, because it turns out that the intake manifold gasket, the old one, was almost exact. It was like 13 thousandths of an inch or something. So I was like, hey, perfect. So I made a little gasket. You can't even see it in there, it's so thin. So I put that in there in the tube, and then I started pressing. But before it gets started, I was afraid that this pressed in piece would be so tight in here that it would actually try and bring this support toward that support and snap it off. So I made myself a little support to go in there to keep that from happening as I tighten that in. Originally designed is to go around it, but then I realized I wouldn't be able to get it back out again, and kind of wanted to get it back out, so I use it that way instead. And you can see, I'll show you some video. I've shot this scene very many times and it's been way too long. I've been trying to shorten it up, so I'm gonna end there. That's how I did it. And when I tighten that up, you'll see here in the video, it drew it together, and it basically pressed the pressed in piece further until I got to exactly the spot that I needed to be. But if you don't do that, then if you don't do some way like this, you are going to have a misalignment, I assume, unless other people have gotten lucky. I've never seen anybody mention this before, but maybe they had a small amount of misalignment and it could work, but it wasn't working for me. So that's how I did that. I hope that helps. Pretty cool, actually. Okay. Got a boo-boo on my thumb, but I think I'll live. This is a 0.37 millimeter shim, actually 0.36. Thought that was close enough. Pretty unnecessary, I'm thinking. I can't imagine that much misalignment's really going to affect anything, but hey, I got it now, might as well use it, right? Two other things that I forgot to note. I was thinking about painting the pulley, but this is the old pulley, 16 years old as far as I can tell, and there's no rust on this thing at all. I mean, it's discolored and all, but it'll get discolored if I paint it, right? So I don't see any reason to paint that brand new pulley, whatever, a cadmium coating or whatever I don't think they can use cadmium anymore. I think it's toxic or something. But so I'm not going to do that. The other thing I noticed is when I have this on, I could rock it just a little tiny bit, and that's why I bought a new one. When I got that one, I think it has the same amount of rock. So if you get a really good spin out of yours and it's quiet, and it has just a little bit of sort of back and forth in it, just reuse it. And finally, really important, so pay attention to this. This bolt needs to go in that way. That's the way I got it out of the other engine. It's a 14 on this side, and the long bolt has to go in this way. Again, I'm learning from Stark Reality's error. And it's an easy one to make, of course. But if you put the bolt in from this direction, and the engine is in, and you need to change this pulley, the bolt will hit the car, and it won't come out, and you'll have to cut it off and get a new bolt and put it in the other way. You have all this room in here if you need to pull it out that way. So make sure you put the bolt in from that direction, so from back to the front of the engine. Little top tip for you there. All right, so I'm getting ready to weigh the engine, and this is my setup. I've got a balance beam here, and I put everything on it that I'm not weighing, which is the load leveler and the cage that holds the weights for the counterweight for the engine, as well as this length of arm, which is heavier than this little length of arm. Also, my level, which was at 0. I think I bumped it just now. I kind of use that as a calibration. I slide it out to get it to equal 0. There it is, 0 again. I'm not weighing that either, right? So all that stuff goes on there, and then I place some counterbalance weights here to balance out everything I'm not weighing so that I'm now at 0. Then what I do is I place the engine here and the weights over there to figure out how much it weighs. Let me show you how I'm doing this. You're supposed to buy special hooks that hook apparently onto here. This is where I looked it up on the internet, and this is where it attaches, which kind of scary because look how thin the meat aluminum is between here and basically nothing that you're lifting the whole engine off of. But anyway, that's where it's said to go. And then another hook goes, allow me to circle around, pardon the bouncy camera. There's another one on the other side of the engine, basically same kind of thing, just right at the top, right? Well, I didn't buy those hooks, and I have one on my old engine, only one. The other one was fixed mounted on that engine. So what I found though was that these will bolt directly on, so you'll have to use something that you have if you want to do this kind of a thing. But I just wanted to be super extra careful, so I also connected one of these guys through the motor mount here using some bolts I had laying around the garage that I know are strong. In fact, it's that bolt right there, and I also connected to there. I'm pretty sure that is not a valid attachment point, but when you've got 3 other ones, I'm sure, you know, just for safety's sake, having it there is probably an okay thing. And I've already lifted this, but it came out really long, so I wanted to redo it. So I'm gonna stop right now and hook it up. All right, so like I pointed out, my load leveler will bolt right to the side, so I didn't need the hook, and obviously these are made to lift engines. And I put this extra bolt here just as a sort of a safety, if you will. I'm not sure how much it lifts. The other primary bolt is over here. And I'm using this L in a way it shouldn't be. I mean, I've got a long lever arm here, but again, I think it'll be okay. Plus I got a spare one over here. Clearly the motor mount can handle the weight of the motor. It's a motor mount, right? So important to note, not all bolts are created equally. Make sure you've got grade 8 hardware on here. And I do, to be honest, I'm not certain about these, but I know those were spare bolts we had from work that we used old high pressure, so I'm pretty sure they're strong. They look like they're stainless. All right, now I'm gonna start lifting. So with all that stuff on it, I'm getting 300, there's a nut on there as well. I don't know what it weighs, but it's about 325 pounds, minus 70 is about 255 pounds, I guess, for the motor. I guess that kind of makes sense because online it looked like the motor weighed about 211 pounds. I looked it up, but it was confusing. It said it was with fuel, and I don't get that because there's not much fuel. The rail and the fuel injectors don't hold much fuel. But if they mean the fuel system, then it's just a rail and fuel injectors. They don't weigh very much either. So I don't know why fuel with fuel means anything. So leave it in the comments if you know. But so that doesn't make any sense to me. But it didn't say anything about what was attached to it. Next up, 2ZZ. So of course it's about to rain on me, but I got the measurement done. Now that the painting is done, I'm going to go ahead and start reversing the order and putting things back on it. Like I said, it's not a perfect paint job. You can see where I didn't degrease well enough and the paint was pulled off by the tape a little bit. But generally speaking, I think it looks pretty good. I'm really kind of stoked about the way the Antimatter logo came out. I was going to make it red, but my wife and I both decided less was more in this case. So, cool. Okay, so we're looking directly on, actually if I come down here, we're looking directly on the Monkey Wrench Racing header. And from this view, you can see exactly, what, 3 bolts? The other 2 are behind the pipes. It's supposed to be torqued to 37 foot-pounds in several passes, but I can't even get a socket on it. I think I'm gonna have to estimate using a wrench. So my advice would be get the PPE header. Hopefully it'd be different. So when putting things together, this is the kind of thing I like to try and think about. This rubber here that this little rubber cap that they've put on there in order to cap it off, has the screw here. I don't know if you can see that, but that's pointed outward, which is good-ish. But if I just sort of picture the engine and how it'll be, there'll be an intake manifold here. The chances are I'm going to be trying to access it from underneath, which means it might be better if this screw were pointed so down a little bit. I mean, I don't think I'm ever going to have to access it, but you just never know. And I might as well take the opportunity now when it's easy to loosen that, rotate it down so that I can get to it if I ever need to tighten it up. If I don't, then it doesn't really matter, right? Anyway, those are the kind of little things that are handy to think about when things are easy to access, like right now. Normally I'd say that while I'm here, I would go ahead and replace this rear main seal. The guy at Monkey Wrench Racing told me they've been working on these engines for 20 years and they've never had one leak. So there's a chance that if I did that, I could actually cause it to leak. So I've decided to defer to their better judgment on that one. And I'm going to go ahead and install the flywheel without changing it. And I opted for a Monkey Wrench Racing flywheel. It's lightened, it's all steel. In the past I've used Fidanzas. I've done it twice now. There's also one in the Corolla that I haven't used yet. And I did kind of have a problem with, I had a problem and I don't know what the cause was in the Spyder, but it was in that area, and just on the chance that it was the Fidanza flywheel that was responsible, I decided to go ahead and try their product instead. So I'm going to put that on now. Oh, and this is also important to note. They provided ARP fasteners, which are a fantastic product. You pay a premium for that product, but I think you can always trust ARP fasteners. I don't think I've ever heard of one failing. But it's important to note that generally flywheel bolts are what they call torque to yield. That means that when a bolt is normally installed, the bolt stretches, and that gives it basically its grip between the threads on the bolt and the threads in the tapped hole. But when you undo the bolt, it's what they call elastic deformation, and the bolt returns to its original shape unless you overstretch it, and that's when you get, broken bolts and things. These are what they call torque to yield, which means that they stretch, but they won't come back. That's how tight you tighten them. I don't understand what that's for, why it needs to be that way. I'm sure they have reasons, and engineers know what they're doing, right? But point is, when you put in flywheel bolts and you tighten them down, if you ever pull them back out again, they should be replaced new. Because I'm getting to the point where I'm starting to install things instead of uninstall them, I think it's a good time to review all of these notes and make sure I haven't forgotten anything. Also, Monkey Wrench sent some extra ones which don't look like what I got off their website, so I'm going to read through those too and make sure that I'm doing everything right here, I'm not missing anything. Alright, so I'm pulling the spark plugs right now, and a couple pieces of advice. Get yourself a spark plug socket that has the little rubber thing inside, because that way it will grip the spark plug and you can pull it out of the long hole. Mine either doesn't have it or lost it somewhere along the way, and so it just slipped out and I had to get a pair of long needle nose pliers to get it out. Now, an expert in plugs will tell you that you can tell a lot from the running of the engine based on what they see in the spark plug. I did a little research online, a few different websites to see, how to read a plug, and I've forgotten a lot of this stuff now, but it's kind of a moot point, because if you take a look at my spark plugs, I think you'll see they're in excellent shape, so this engine must be perfectly running. Obviously, Monkey Wrench put new ones in before they gave it to me, so I won't know, but apparently if they're black and wet, then there's some oil, and if it's obviously if it's rusty, that would be bad. I think a very light brown is good. That's what I had in my 1ZZ back when I read all that stuff, and that was supposed to be okay. Obviously brand new is really good. I'm going to pull these out anyway. I don't know about the gap, but I bought iridiums, and I think iridium's supposed to be like higher quality, and I prefer that. So I'm going to pop the iridiums in, but I'll hang on to these and see how it goes. I might put them back in later if I don't feel like spending the money on new ones when the iridiums are done. So anyway, looks pretty good. All right, so I just got back from the internet. It's a long trip because I fell asleep. But what I found out was, so my questions actually were, whether or not I should gap them, and if so, if it's a different gap than it is on a normal spark plug. And what I found along the way by going to the NGK website was that they had 5 things regarding all of their plugs, or Iridium plugs, I don't remember, but one of them I thought was very interesting, which was they don't use any anti-seize compound on the spark plugs because they had a high incidence of reported failures where people over torque them, because of course it goes in much smoother, and I don't agree with that, and I'm going to do it because I'm far more concerned about a plug getting corroded and stuck in there than I am over tightening, because I have a tendency not to over tighten in the first place. But also, theoretically, a torque spec is designed to have some kind of a lubricant in there. On a car, usually it's 30 weight, equivalent to 30 weight engine oil. I don't know what anti-seize compound is, you know, what the viscosity is. But I don't use that anyway. I actually use the 30 weight oil, and I think I'll just be very careful with how tight I put them in. But I just really do think it's more of a danger of having trouble getting it out than the other way, than over torquing it. They said not to torque, excuse me, not to gap the Iridium spark plugs. So I decided that and I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to check it and make sure they're all the same. If one of them's damaged for some reason, or if it's too small and the gap's too small and it seems like it's damaged or way too big, then at least I'll know and I can act accordingly. So that's it. I'm starting to notice some differences between the two motors, so I thought I would highlight them. I don't know why I chose this bolt to start with, but I removed this wire, this ground wire here. I was going to label it. It bolted right here on the 1ZZ. And you can see that that is like a boss that is molded into the head. There's two, one above and one below, and the one above has this bracket on it which holds part of the electrical system wiring harness, right? On the 2ZZ engine, neither of those bosses exist. They would be right here, and they're just not there. The closest thing is this cooling tube mount right here, which actually, that cooling tube is right here and it exists, but as you can see, it's built a little differently. It bolts right onto the edge of the block where there is nothing down there. So I'm gonna have to overcome that somehow. Alright, so essentially nothing in this area transfers over the 2ZZ as far as I can tell. This connector plugged into the head there. I don't know if it's like, it looks kind of like a temperature sensor. It's real close to the water here. I really don't know. And I should also point out that at this point I haven't looked at the wiring harness that came with the 2ZZ and what has to change. And also I'm just labeling, you know, 1C goes to 1C and 1A goes to 1A and so forth. But anyway, none of this stuff exists down there on the 2ZZ. Okay, there's a connector here, and then a wiring holder here, and some wires go that way, down there, and the crank position sensor right here runs up and back that way. There's also a little wire coming down here, and some wiring up there. Alright, I took off the intake manifold to get to some of these wires, and gee, I wonder where all of my oil could have been going. It's gonna be a mystery. Okay, victory. The wiring harness is out. You can see there's a little blue tag on virtually every single connector. It was very tedious to do this, and there were times where I was thinking, is this really necessary? Why do I have to label the IAC connector, for instance? What else would it be? But when I look at it all spread out here, I'm like, well, which one's the IAC? You know, and I can't, I even know, and I don't really see it, so I'm not really sure. And there are a couple that escaped marking, I think, when I was removing it. This one, for instance, I don't know, sorry, right there. That one, for instance, I don't even know really where that goes, so I'm hoping process of elimination. I admit I didn't mark the coils and the fuel injectors because I figured those would be blatantly obvious. But check this out. What's that little guy? There's 4 there, so he's not a fuel injector. So yeah, I missed a couple, I guess. I'll have to figure them out. My recommendation is be very thorough like I did here. It's tedious, but just do it. It'll be a lot easier, you know, when you put it back together. You won't have to try and match up shapes and numbers of pins and what side of the engine it goes on and that sort of thing if you just label everything. And I labeled everything on the engine as well. Every single one of those tags has another tag. You know, yeah, I know the oil pressure sensor's got to be down there on the oil pressure somewhere, but it's just a lot faster and easier to putting it back together again if you put the tags on both sides. And then when I come over here, like I said, I noticed that some of those things don't exist, so I'm just going to have to figure it out. Okay, welcome to Florida. I was just about to come out and start working on the cars, and I heard it start to rain. So I looked in the backyard, nothing. I came up, front yard, here it is, rain. But look, at the neighbor's house, driveway over there, you can see it's still dry. It stopped the minute I came out. So I had like 30 seconds of rain in the front yard. This is, you know, this happens elsewhere, but I find it happens in Florida a lot more often than anywhere else I've ever lived.